evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the committee, and to my right and left here on this side of the table, I'm joined by my fellow councillors. It will be the five of us who will be making the decisions on the cases in front of us. On the other side of the table and round the way are the officers who will be presenting the cases and offering us advice. The most senior officer present this evening is Katie Hurrell, who is here acting on behalf of the Director of Planning and Place. So, with those introductions done, are there any apologies for absence?
None, sir.
There are none, thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Are there any other declarations? No. Okay. This particular meeting, we don't actually have minutes to approve, so it might help, I think, if I give an idea of the running order that we're going to use. In a moment or two, we're going to consider the application at Kensington Leisure Centre. Now, you may have seen on an earlier agenda an application for development in Gledhow Gardens. That's been withdrawn from this agenda, so it will come to a subsequent meeting. We will then consider Addison Road, Smith Terrace, Euro Place, and then the courtyard, and then finally the advert application in Cromwell Road. Okay. So that's going to be our running order. So we can start by having, it's in a separate strategic pack, and I think Katie Hurrell, Katie, you're going to present the Leisure Centre application, I believe, yeah?
I am, thank you very much, Chairman. So the application site is a building I'm sure you're familiar with, the Kensington Leisure Centre on the Lancaster West Estate. The building is council owned, hence this application is before you this evening for determination. It's not in the conservation area, but the Avondale Conservation Area is just located to the south of the building. The proposal before you this evening is the installation of solar panels on the roof for the creation of renewable energy. The application has been submitted as part of the North Kensington Community Energy, which is a community-owned energy project developed by Repowering London, and that's with support from the council's own climate change team. If I start with the existing roof plan of the building, you can see that there are already some structures on the roof. There are 3 domed roof lights where my cursor are towards the properties of Verity Close. This structure in the middle is a plant enclosure, and on the far right you can see there's an existing green roof. On the proposed roof plan on the screen now you can see the solar panels. You'll see that they are in various sections along that roof. There are 416 in total. Some would be located on that green roof, and then others located around those structures I've already identified for you. In terms of their impact, this slide gives you a detailed section of the roof lights. They are angled at 10 degrees as solar panels are required to in order to capture the sunlight and work efficiently. But you can see that the profile still remains low on the roof line. The top image on the slide is the existing section, and the bottom slide is proposed just to show you the limited impact that these would have. In fact, officers have confirmed that from street level public views there would be no solar panels, given the building itself is 5 stories in height. And that concludes the presentation, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Those speakers, any questions about this application? Anyone? Lloyd?
Yes, thank you. Just to see, I see 48 people notified, no objections. And the question on the green roof, that stays, but the solar panels are just popped on top.
Yes, so the Council's Greening SPD has looked into this matter and it's confirmed that solar panels can still be applied to green roofs and both can function successfully.
That's thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. This has to come to committee, as has been mentioned, because obviously the leisure centre is actually owned by the local authority. Well, if there are no other questions or points, I will probably move to a vote. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So if we can now move on to the application in the North Pack. And Morgan Roberts, Morgan, you're going to present this, I think. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So this is for the application at 96 Addison Road, which is indicated in this aerial view with the red outline. On the left-hand side, we have the location plan also outlined in red, and we have an existing photograph showing the front and side elevation of the site in question, along with the existing access to the rear car park, which is where the proposed development is in question. The proposed development in this case is the erection of 4 car parking canopies. On this side, we have the existing access into the rear car park. And again, some more photos detailing the existing rear car park, along with the rear boundary wall of the site there. This indicates the existing layout in terms of the plans, as well as the existing car parking bays and the rear elevation, the rear boundary wall. Under this proposed slide, we have the proposed layout, which includes the 4 car parking canopies, which is where my cursor is right now. In terms of these will overhang the existing car parking bays by 30 centimetres. And in terms of looking at the impact of the access to the rear car park, as well as the turning circle, this would be minimally impacted as a result of the proposed development. We do see an angle of the proposed rear elevation, but here is a bigger vision of the proposed side elevation, which indicates the dimensions of the 4 car parking canopies, as well as the setback from the rear wall of the site boundary. I'm happy to take any further questions with regard to this application, and my recommendation is to grant it with conditions. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think residents of Bartlett House have registered to speak. I think Mr. and Mrs. Damien, are you present? If you can come forward, please, and take the chairs here at the end of the table. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
And when you're ready, we understand you're obviously neighbours within the building. You've got up to 3 minutes between you to present what you have to say. So please go ahead when you're ready.
All right, if I can start, the building was redeveloped in 2014 and there was an extension. As a result, the garages were demolished and rebuilt, reducing the turning circle. That was subject to litigation, and it is acknowledged in a legal expert report that the turning circle as it stands already makes it extremely difficult to park cars in the garages opposite the parking spaces. The proposed canopy is not erected directly on the wall. It is proud of the wall. Hence, the cars would have to shift out a bit, and that would make it absolutely impossible for the cars in the garages opposite to actually utilize their garages for parking. In addition, it would make it very difficult for fire vehicles or other ambulances or emergency vehicles to enter and exit the building easily.
Yeah, just to reiterate, if you go back to your image, it shows that the posts are proud of the walls, which means that that car is going to be proud of that wall by 160 centimeters. There are no dimensions shown on your drawing for the distance between that parked car and the garages. In fact, the demised garages are not even shown on your drawings, and the distance between that parked car and the garages is not shown. So as we said, the development was, the garages were demolished and rebuilt, and the garages, while a car is parked at the moment in its demised space, those garages cannot be used. So that's sorry, I beg your pardon. So
don't think it's you. That's right.
So placing that steel column proud of the wall brings the whole, shifts the car parking space 160 millimeters as per your drawing, making it impossible to park in the garages, which aren't shown on your drawings.
So our objection is to the design. If it was not proud of the wall,
Exactly.
No issue.
If that cantilever was built off of the wall, that would be fine, but you've actually introduced a post that moves the parking bays forward towards the garages. So we'd ask that the turning circle is acceptable, so that not only can the residents use their garages, but also that a fire engine can actually access the site in case there's an emergency.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much. Now, no agent is registered to speak, so it's turn to ask questions to the objector. I'll start. I don't know, perhaps one of the other drawings can help here, but are you saying that the image we just saw, that the camper is coming out and it's going near the garages, which are at right angles
Yeah.
to what we saw?
Could I approach the screen?
Well, let's see if we can just, well, can you get one of a diagram?
Yeah,
and
so
just-
there are, opposite those spaces,
Yeah.
there are garages which are not shown on your drawing. So if I can just,
Am I allowed to go to the slide? with the
Yeah,
images?
you just go back to, you go back to the slides as the gentleman suggests.
yeah, exactly.
Right,
so
okay.
you see opposite those 4 bays, there are garages
Yes.
with electronic doors.
Right.
So you can see them there with the grey doors.
Oh, yes,
So,
okay,
so right now, if the car is parked in the parking space,
yes.
you cannot physically turn
Yes,
a car and get into
Okay,
the
All right,
garage.
so the crucial one, I guess it's the top right-hand one,
Yes,
because there, what's happening is the proposal is to put these campers on the sort of left-hand side of that white wall.
Yeah.
Yes, and by doing that, if a car was parked there, you're saying getting in and out of those garages would become
Impossible.
difficult.
Impossible.
at the moment, as it stands, if a car is parked in its demise space, those garages are practically impossible to
You
get
can't-
into.
you can't really-
So if
So
you're to-
every millimeter counts.
So if you're to introduce a post that is proud of that wall, if you're not going to hang that canopy off of the wall,
Yes.
you're actually pushing those spaces
Yeah,
forward
yeah,
towards
no,
the
I understand.
garages. So you're reducing the space between those garages and the
Alright.
parking space.
Okay, I think I understand. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any other, do you have questions about this?
Yes, I have a small
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
just a little bit. You are residents, you live there. How many residents are in that property or building?
There's 10
There's
flats.
10 apartments in the
10
flat.
apartments, how many there are parking lot spots? Do they have assigned one or park
Yes,
whenever?
so it's 10 apartments
Mhm.
and there are 10 parking allocations. There are 6 garages and 4 parking spaces. So by increasing those 4 garages, you are detrimenting 6 garages that are opposite them.
Whose
Four
idea was to actually make this proposal in the first place?
The
The-
people
the
who
people
own the
that
parking
parking
space.
spaces.
Have they consulted the residents, 10 of you?
No, they said we are going to put in this application. If you'd like to make an objection, you should make it to the council directly.
But why would they do something like that without seeing how it
Because
would
they're
benefit?
paying for it, not out of the service charge, they're paying for it personally.
But it's for you as a resident to use, not to make your life more difficult, right?
Exactly.
Doesn't make any sense at
Yeah.
all.
And just to be clear, our objection is to the design.
Not to the canopy. So if the canopy was hung off the wall, no problem. But to introduce posts that push the car parking towards the garages, that is our objection.
Have they consulted with you? Did you receive any letters in the post within a week or
Just
two
the
weeks?
planning permission.
Just the planning from Kensington and Chelsea, not from our residents, just from Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea.
Okay, so nothing was through the letterbox or posted somewhere, this would count or two, we can comment, we can collaborate with you, change some drawings.
Any other questions? Lot.
Just to clarify what you just said, I've got, there's 29 properties were notified by RBKC with the 4 objections. And your understanding of the emergency vehicles, where did you get that information from? From emergency vehicles themselves or?
Yeah, so a Class B fire truck is larger than a standard domestic vehicle. At the moment, I own a Ford Mondeo and I cannot park my Ford Mondeo, which is a standard Ford Mondeo, into garage number 3. And I have to very politely ask my neighbor, please, can you let me get in? Because this is his demise space. So we work together in order to accommodate each other. If we were to then introduce posts, there wouldn't be that negotiation. There's a physical structure that would block me from getting into
But I think the point is a fire truck is bigger than our car.
than a Ford.
Exactly.
And just one other thing, just following up on, it was mentioned about, is there a residents association in your block? Do you normally have like regular meetings
Yes.
and communication?
And this was never brought
And this
up.
was never part of that? No. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well,
You know, would it not be a fair comment, and you can agree or disagree with me, but to say that, you know, London, it's an old city, it's not built for cars. It's perhaps unreasonable to expect to park a family-sized car in every space, and sometimes you do need to invest in a sort of small car, Fiat 500, something like that, to park in certain spaces. Is it not fair to say that, perhaps residents should consider smaller cars? Now, you can agree or disagree with that.
I
I'm just putting the point to you.
Well,
I disagree. I'm afraid that a garage and a parking space, to be fit for purpose, has to follow certain building regulations. So a standard car parking space in the UK to follow building regulations is 2 meters by 4 meters. That is fine, but you're moving that 2 meters by 4 meters towards a garage which is already not fit for purpose. So in doing that, you're actually moving away from building regulations. So building regulations are here to help us, not to kind of bend the rules or say, well, maybe we should all not be parking a car. It has to be fit for purpose.
I would also add that the residents in this building are paying a service charge for these garages, while the people who own the parking spaces do not pay a service charge.
Exactly.
So what you're ultimately saying is, we're paying a service charge for a garage we will be unable to use, and the people who aren't paying a service charge for the parking spaces will have spaces they can park in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very good. Well, thank you. If you take your seats, that's great. So colleagues, our opportunity to talk to the officers about this. I think there are actually quite a few issues that I think we need to be clear about here. The first is, within the planning system, are there regulations relating to accessibility and turning circles for vehicles? Is that something that exists in the system? How does that fit in?
So whilst I cannot answer that specifically, what I can say is that in terms of assessing the application, an informal discussion was conducted with our Highways and Transport Department, to which they then did conclude within that the turning circle of vehicles would not be impacted as a result of the proposed development that is seen before us.
Right. Okay. But it's not. This is not a formal. There isn't some formal requirement that fits into the planning system for this. No.
Unfortunately, I can't give
No.
the answer.
Okay. We're not there.
There's sort of no standard guideline that's covered by planning policy. Within our transport SPD, we do specify minimum size for bay width, but that's more relating to new development.
Yes.
This isn't the situation here. It's a helpful guideline, I suppose.
Right.
But we don't have a policy within the development plan that specifically says what standards need to be applied.
Okay.
Do we have to have plans correct, meaning exactly what it is to show the distance between to approve them, or they can be vague? Do we have some kind of obligation to disclose where is the fire hydrant in emergency on the plans? Because this is quite narrow, you can see. And if you put a car there and you want to maneuver that, and let's say 2 cars are already parked and there is a fire, I want to know where is a fire hydrant, and if ambulance or police or fire brigade will enter. So do we have such plans?
We don't, as presented to us, but one thing I would want to point out is that I remarked when I conducted my site visit with the photos that I showed on the previous slides, I did think to myself that a large vehicle such as a fire engine, it would be extremely difficult for that particular vehicle to access the car park in its existing state.
My last question, when you talk to applicant, do you advise, do you you maybe have this project plausible if you do it different way? What is your relation with the applicant? Do you have advising role as well?
So, in terms of conducting the site visit for this particular application, the applicants granted me access into the site but they didn't ask me any further questions in relation to the application. Had they asked me further questions about it, I would say potentially one way that it may work or it may not work, but it would be informal advice, and I would refer them to our pre-application advice service for a further detailed analysis on the matter, for which there are various grades, as people will obviously know.
If I could jump in, I think it's important to note that as a local planning authority, we have an obligation to determine whatever is presented to us. So whilst we might be able to have conversations and steer development in a certain direction, we still have to determine what is put before us. So it may be that sometimes opportunities are presented where we can work with an applicant to amend it, but the reality is the legislation is clear that we have to determine what is presented to us.
But it's written somewhere, you have to carry that project according to the drawing. So drawing must have a scale, and I cannot see scale here.
So just to indicate here, the scale bar is up at the top here, and I cannot remember, I think it was 1 in 50. This is a zoomed in image, I should clarify that as well. I think it was 1 in 50 the scale for this particular one, in that regard.
Points well.
Thanks. So just in regard to, again, the manoeuvrability, specifically of fire engines, I note in your response to residents' comments about their concerns, you say the existing site circumstances do not allow easy access. Does that not make it even more important to do everything you can to promote access? I mean, if the site allows easy access, well, then it's fine to make it a bit more difficult because it's still quite easy to get in. Where access is going to be very difficult for a fire engine, don't we want to do everything possible to make it easy for that fire engine to get in?
For which I hear those comments, and I, think that it's very important with regard to that. However, in this matter, it is more down to a management issue of the particular site itself, rather than a planning matter for which the application is presented to us in this regard. So whilst I would say, because obviously fire safety is paramount for everything, it is extremely difficult to gain access to that site with a big vehicle such as a fire engine.
And just one very quick further question, if I may. You said before turning circle vehicles wouldn't be affected.
It was upon a very informal conversation that I had with a member of our highways team.
I just struggle to understand, considering there is 160 mil of extra structure that extends out from the bottom.
Correct.
I just struggle to understand how that wouldn't affect the turning circle, even if it's only a small effect. Surely there's still some effect. I mean, being a driver myself, every single millimetre counts when you're turning in London.
No, it certainly does. You're absolutely right. But intrinsically, when we're thinking about it, the bigger impact, I believe, would more likely be caused by the roof of the canopies. And if I just bring up the proposed side elevation here, as well as the car that is portrayed on the plans, which for those that are potentially petrol heads is an Audi R8, you can potentially park a Range Rover within those spaces as well. So larger vehicles can be parked within there. So it's again down to a management issue for the residents themselves. If, for instance, all four car parks were occupied, it would again be a management issue for the owners of the garages in terms of how to access them.
Roberto, last
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There must be some rather sensitive cars that are afraid of a bit of rain and need a canopy to cover them. I'd just like to ask, in terms of the design, is there anything that can be done in terms of greening? Obviously, we spoke about green roofs in the previous application. Is there anything you could do on top of that to make it a bit greener, a bit nicer?
Well, I think that we have to assess what is being presented to us in that regard. And whilst it may not have a strong leaning towards the greening SPD and with an idea to make it green, intrinsically, when one looks at the application, you're assessing it on the grounds of whether it is acceptable for those four car parking canopies to exist. Now that element is a design element which hasn't been included, and perhaps should have been, but we have to assess the application that's being put forward.
Yeah, I'm asking for a condition. Would we be able to put a condition? Is it this? I mean, I don't know. Is it the sort of thing that you can put a green roof?
I think it probably, just refer to my colleague's advice there, it probably would change the design of it significantly in that regard, to which it would be a deviation to the plans that have been submitted to us to assess the planning applications committee today. Yes.
If you put a roof, a green roof over canopy, how easy it will be to maneuver for the fire brigade, having already obstructing aluminium frame, having canopy, which is canopy, and having green roof. How do you imagine emergency fire vehicle getting into this?
I think just if I refer back to the layout of it, I think it's, you know, coming back to the point that it's still very, very difficult to access for a fire engine, even to come through the front gate at the site, even let alone coming into the accessing the rear car park here. In that regard, would be my response.
Okay. I just a final question, my part. I mean, obviously, I think we all appreciate how sort of unwelcome this is from a resident point of view. But I'm just interesting comments, perhaps JT or Lorna from the legal department, in a very narrow terms of being a development. I'm just trying to think what about this might be unacceptable in terms of the structure that we operate in. We explored turning circles of vehicles. I'm struggling to think of something which is actually within the planning remit,
Balkan size.
which really, or sorry,
Balkan size.
Yeah, so if we look at parking specifically, you'll know that as a borough, generally, we are trying to reduce dependency on cars and reduce the number of cars on the road. Equally, really recognise that they're valuable to a lot of residents. And in terms of planning policy relating to parking, tends, as I said earlier, to relate to new development. But under one of our policies, CT1, we do talk about ensuring development doesn't increase parking pressure within the borough. So there could be an argument to be said, if this really does mean that the spaces are no longer usable, the garage is no longer usable, that might push those cars onto the street. That would be covered, I suppose, within planning policy. However, as we've heard from Morgan, it is the transport officer's view that actually these companies will not impede the use of those garages. And so that wouldn't then apply. It still would be usable spaces, in which case I'm not sure sort of what planning angle we would have to replace them.
The matters we've heard that in effect is an argument between the people who own the garages, the people who own this space, who want the cafe, and the residents who live in the building. That's really a civil matter between them, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's out with the planning system.
That's outside of.
Yeah.
Can I have a last question?
All right.
When you visited, did you see anything which says fire access on the street painted, or keep clear fire access?
I won't deny it was a potentially a while ago. I think I did date stamp the images. So this was before Christmas. Unfortunately, my mind doesn't cast memory back to that particular point there, Councillor. I'm sorry.
Residents, do you have any knowledge?
No, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to cross-question residents there. No, you can't do that in the conventions we have. But you can't recall if there was. Okay, I understand.
Chairman, just to say,
Yeah, Lorna.
no, I don't really have anything to add to what Katie has just said, because it's sort of, you know, the transport officer, the highways officer, they're not here tonight, but they're the experts in relation to obviously car parking, and you know, and they're satisfied that the situation won't be materially different than what it is now. So it is difficult to find a planning reason to refuse the application.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we probably need to reach a decision on this. I think somewhat reluctantly, because I'm rather sympathetic to the points that residents made, but I think in a very narrow planning terms, I'm really struggling to see a reason why this can't be considered acceptable, with a lot of issues between residents and the owners of the space to be sorted out, but they're not planning matters. So that's perhaps regrettably where I come from on this. I think what we should do is we should put the matter to a vote and see where we go. So the recommendation is to grant this with the conditions set out. Can I see those in favour of granting, please? Can I see those against? Okay, so the recommendation is not adopted. Now, I think we have to, the next stage is we have to decide what the reasons for refusal are. So would suggest, perhaps Councillor Lane can help with this, I would suggest.
I mean, perhaps I'd like my initial thoughts.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I actually find the argument that residents are now unable to get their cars into the garages, park on the street, and considering it is a borough policy not to increase pressure on street parking, that could.
I mean, I suppose that's an aspect, I guess, of residential amenity for which there are policies. Yes. I think that's. I think amenity probably. I think the traffic policy that Katie Hurrell mentioned earlier, I think that perhaps also would come into it. The implication being that this proposed development might lead to additional pressure on parking in streets.
If I may.
Does that make sense?
I would suggest that the reason for refusal would focus on that element rather than amenity, which in general covers living conditions such as noise and light and sensitive enclosure. Doesn't traditionally extend to.
Perhaps that's been pushed too far. Yeah, I understand.
Whereas, as I said, we have policy that specifically talks about ensuring that on-street parking pressure isn't increased if members aren't satisfied. And I think that actually this would mean those garages become unusable, or those cars have to go somewhere. They might end up on the street.
Okay. So Councillor Lane, would you like to propose that as the reason why we refuse the application?
Yes.
Is that seconded?
Yes.
So Councillor Joseph seconds. So that's the resolution, but quite clear what it is. So in that case, can I see those in favour of that as the resolution for refusing? Okay, so that's agreed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now move on to the application of 1 Smith Terrace, and Aaron Lau is going to present that. So Aaron, when you're ready, please.
Evening Chairman, evening members. This is item agenda S010. The address is 1 Smith Terrace, and proposed before you for the reduction of a ground floor space to create a patio as per previously consented under 2020 planning approval. In addition to that, this proposal is to increase in width and height of the third floor existing outrigger and restating grading to an existing upper floor roof. Should remind members that there is a addendum that's been circulated for this particular item with particular reference to deletion of one of the sections as set out in the approved plans under condition 2. Further to that, there are 2 further representations that have been received since the publication of the report. Moving to the site itself, this is the site in question as outlined in this particular red rectangular block. What you can see there, it's a terrace property. On the right hand side, you've got the Chelsea Synagogue. Then immediately abounding the site is the rest of the terrace, Smith Terrace. Some aerial views of the site in question. These are the views at the back of the property. Again, as shown in the red box, what you can make out there is you can see the property has been extended on the upper floor through a historic consent, and at the same time, just below that, at the lower ground floor, you can make out there's a glass infill style sort of conservatory. So at this moment, the property doesn't benefit from any outdoor external amenity space on the ground floor. Turning to some general site photos now. Top left is obviously the front elevation of the property. You can clearly see it's a two-storey terrace property to the lower ground floor and a mansard that's been added later in time. Again, the infill glass extension can be seen on the bottom central photo of that particular image. Again, you get to appreciate that obviously there is no external amenity space, and at the same time, just along the boundary, you can see this high screen that provides privacy to the neighbouring property at number 2. Turning to some existing proposed floor plans, left-hand images shows you the existing ground and first floor plans. What you notice there on the right-hand images is the proposed ground floor plans, where you can clearly see that the patio to be created and thereby affording external amenity space and outdoor space, which was incidentally granted under a previous 2020 approval. So this will be identical to that particular arrangement. Moving on to the upper floors, again, existing plans on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see the access for the stairs that leads onto the terrace that's situated on the second floor. There is an existing opening, and therefore there's no new openings to be created. Simply, what's been proposed here is to install railings to ensure the safety of the occupiers using that particular terrace at the second floor level. Turning to the existing and proposed rear elevations now. Part of this proposal seeks to marginally increase and marginally increase in height as well as the width of the existing outrigger. Although it states increase in height, it's actually no higher than the existing top of the parapet. It's simply to increase the floor to ceiling height of the room below, and therefore the existing height would be the same height as the existing parapet wall. You can make out there are railings proposed, which you can see above that particular flat roof section, with the existing opening that opens out onto that informal existing terrace area. And just at the lower ground floor, you can also see the railings that serves the other additional terrace outdoor area, with obviously the courtyard patio in the bottom right. Just turning to some sections now. Again, what you can see there is the extent of the railings. Obviously, the proposal does not actually increase the depth of the existing first floor outrigger, but merely to basically infill the top section by raising or increasing the floor to ceiling height of the room below it, as well as the installation of the railings. And finally, a section on the opposite side, which shows the existing terrace that separates, so the existing screening that separates the two adjoining properties, with the new railings that actually sits above that. So overall, the council considers the physical changes as proposed under this proposal would preserve the character and setting of the conservation area, and the proposal by way of what's being proposed for the installation of the railings will not actually incur any loss of living conditions. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a couple of objectors who are near neighbours. If you'd like to come to the table, please. Please have a seat. And between you, you've got 3 minutes shared. So whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Jan Rowland, and I'm at number 2, so the direct neighbour, and I'm speaking this evening on behalf of 7 of the objectors. I've got 3 main issues that I'd like to address this evening. First of all, the roof terrace and the railings, which you can see in the picture there, and somebody standing on the top of it. I'm concerned that the council, during this whole process since 2019, hasn't queried the assertions made by the applicants, implicitly and explicitly, that the roof terrace already exists and the railings on it simply need reinstating. The reality is there has never been a roof terrace or railings on this property. Wandsmith Terrace has only ever had 3 planning applications, 2 in 1995 and 1 in 96, none of them granted permission for the roof terrace. I've lived next door to the property for 25 years and I remember the then owners sought pre-planning advice on the likelihood of getting permission for a roof terrace. They were told by the council that they would not get it due to the height of the building and the resulting invasion of privacy to the neighbours on 3 sides, including the synagogue. Prematurely, the previous owners had taken out a sash window and put in the French doors, which you also saw there, and bought railings. All had to be abandoned and were never installed, apart from the French window, which was referred to as the door onto the roof terrace. It is in breach of planning. To put a roof terrace on an even higher rear extension would be an invasion of neighbours' privacy, looking into kitchens, bedrooms and gardens, the synagogue, all down Smith Terrace and opposite in Tedworth Square, the flats. My second point is regarding the increase in the existing side of the rear extension. The application to increase the size to the rear extension was rejected by this council in 2020 and it was appealed. The appeal was also rejected by the Inspector for the Secretary of State in 2021. I would argue that the Inspector's report is as relevant to this amended application as then, and I'm surprised in fact the council is minded to approve the application. The Inspector concluded that any increase to the height and width of the existing rear extension would be to the detriment of the character and appearance of the terrace. This end of Smith Terrace, numbers 1 to 15, has no other rear extensions such as this, as noted by the Inspector. He also notes that some of the extensions at the other end of the terrace do not present as a positive and subordinate extension and should not be seen as an overriding character of the locality. The Inspector also noted no light impact statements on the surrounding properties had been supplied, and therefore the applicant had not demonstrated the scheme would be appropriate to light levels on neighbouring properties. This is still the case today. The Inspector further notes that an increase in the existing rear extension would be in contravention of 5 Royal Borough Conservation Area Policy rules contained in the RBKC Local Plan 2019 and contrary to paragraphs 196 and 193 of the National Planning Policy Framework, concluding it would cause an unacceptable harm to the significance of the conservation area and conflicts with the development plan. I'm not sure what really has changed. And finally, I would just like to make the point that this seemed to have been fast-tracked, and those of us who had objected previously were taken unawares and didn't really have any time to properly look at the amendments. So, in conclusion, I don't think enough has changed in the amended plans to allow the Council to ignore the findings of the Secretary of State with regard to increasing the size of the rear extension. And also, I'm concerned that the Council has accepted the applicant's assertion that a roof terrace and railings already exist. If anyone from the Council has stood on that roof terrace, you will know what we're talking about in terms of invasion of privacy.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. So our opportunity to ask questions, and if you'd like to answer a question, obviously please do go ahead. Who would like to go for? Roberto.
Just 2 quick ones. Do any of the other properties along Smith Terrace have terraces at either of the levels?
Not from 1 to 15, so not at our end. I think a few of them right at the bottom of the terrace may have some.
Right.
So I was going to say, I just think to add, it is. You saw from the pictures, it overlooks all the remaining fencing to the adjoining properties. The fact they've got no outdoor space is their decision to put a vaulted light well over the top of their enclosed space. They could very easily put a flat, accessible light well, and then that would be guarded from the neighbouring properties and wouldn't overlook the neighbouring gardens.
Right. And just secondly, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. If we were to, I think with this application condition it so that the higher terrace couldn't be used, the terrace and only had access to the first floor one rather than the second floor, would that
Yeah, that's
raise
fine,
your
because
concerns?
the lower one, as you can, I don't know if you can flick back to the one.
Well, you can see that middle picture. If someone stood, if you put a flat glass roof there and someone stood on it, there's a fence to your property.
Exactly, so the flat glass roof, I think, is what they're proposing to take out the lantern lights. And that fence is my fence, so when I'm standing by my fence, I cannot see that extension that they're proposing to raise in height. But from the photographs, you can see that if I stand there, they, with the new height, are looking right over me, but also right down the terrace.
Thank you.
I think also just to reiterate what the inspector said before, that he said that any increase in width or depth or height of that outrigger, given it's a complete anomaly at that end of the terrace anyway, is completely contrary to the character of the conservation area. So we're sort of surprised in some ways that the council are recommending any increase at all in the size of it, but it's definitely the higher terrace that causes us the most concern.
Any other question? Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in relation to this top terrace, as it currently is, and perhaps if we can actually just go back to the previous slide, not that one, the one with all the different photos. Can get there. Just want to add, so that view on the bottom right there, that's the top terrace as it currently is.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It's non-demised, but with a door that was put in.
The door's put
The
in.
door was a
without
sash
consent.
window, which they took out.
Just trying to understand, or whilst you've been living in the neighbouring property, have people used that as a
No.
terrace? Has there
No.
been
Well, I think it might be illegal from health and
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah,
might
I've been
raise-
there.
no railings? Is
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there 25 years, it's never been used as a terrace because they did a pre-approval application to see if it could happen years ago and it was, they were told they wouldn't get it.
Everyone else uses the external space at ground floor level.
Yeah, where the lantern.
Maybe a
lights-
slight raise on ground floor level where the lantern light is. No one has any outrigger anyway, so therefore this would. I'm in number 5, so I'm 5 down, and we've stood in our garden and looked back, and it would be such a complete invasion of privacy right into our garden.
Thank you very much.
I've a question. Can we go, it's right at the end of the presentation, where it shows it's slightly CGI-ish, it's sort of coloured plan. There we go. I think, actually, there's another one.
Yeah, there's another one. on the
It
side.
shows, I think the next one maybe. No, it's actually in the pack. It shows.
Yeah,
That
that's
one
it.
there, yeah, with the person on top.
No, I'm thinking of. I'm just trying to see because it seems I'm certain I saw a plan where it showed that high up on next door there seemed to be a terrace or a balcony. I think it would be number 2. Is that correct?
That's
Right up at the mansard level.
Yes, which
of
they're
number
also,
1.
they're putting in, but it's not really, it's a security railing for the windows.
Right.
It's not really a balcony.
So that's a sort of
So
well,
could
a
you-
kind of Juliet
Yes,
balcony.
exactly.
Okay, so the depth of that is actually quite limited.
It's like that.
Okay, so it's sort of decorative, I suppose. If you're in the room, you kind of have a railing you look onto. Okay, all right, I understand. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check that. Any other questions? No. Okay, thank you very much. You need to return to your seat. Excellent. Questions too? Lauren, if you go first.
Yes, thank you. I'm rather concerned to hear about the window at the top that's been removed and replaced with a door with no railings on there. Do we have some more information on that or enforcement of?
That's not actually part of this proposal itself.
Sure.
Obviously, as alluded by local residents, they were aware of a particular window that used to be there. What you can clearly see now is that window no longer exists, and there is a door that opens onto that flat roof section. We do not have any sort of enforcement records regarding any sort of complaints with particular regard to that particular alteration that have been made. There are certain works that you can carry out under permitted development, under Class A, where you can in fact swap out windows, insert windows, put new doors into particular properties. That doesn't actually require planning permission. So obviously this is the decision that was taken by whether the existing or the previous owners to install that particular door. That's repeated, that's not under consideration for this particular.
I get that, but the existing images you've shown us do not have planning permission for that door to be there with no railings.
There's no record of that, no.
Just to follow on from Councillor North's point. So what we're saying is that replacing the window with that door is something that it might not be possible to take enforcement action because it wouldn't require planning permission because whoever owns the property would say, oh, I created this this maintenance door or something like that, and that therefore it doesn't require permission. Whereas putting up the railings constitutes development, which does require permission.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think that's useful. Roberto, sorry, I interrupted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just, Mr. Lau, if you could comment on Mrs. Rowland's quotation of the inspector and the refusal, because that seemed pretty clear that what was proposed in terms of the extension shouldn't be allowed. So I'd just like you to
So most certainly. Obviously, a lot of residents are.
Sorry about this. The wonders. The wonders of being in a Basil Spence building, built, I think, actually opened by the Princess Royal in 1977. But anyway, I apologise for that. So if it happens again, we'll just have to pause for a moment so that we can hear each other.
So local residents are referring to a particular planning refusal, to which obviously the council rightly refused an application. But you have to note that that particular refusal, as well as appeal that which was dismissed, was for a completely different description altogether, because that proposal sought to propose an extension literally where that door is situated, and the proposal also sought to increase the width of the existing outrigger to almost this point here. So rightly, the council did refuse the application, and there were quite significant design and heritage concerns, and the inspector did agree with the council's decision because obviously it would be considered to be quite a dominant feature within the terrace. So therefore, what that proposal proposed is completely different to what's been proposed now. I mean, you can clearly see the existing outrigger has these quite tall parapet walls, which you would normally do for any flat roof. So all this application is seeking to do is to raise the internal floor to ceiling of the existing study to the point of the maximum and highest point of the parapet. So it's no higher than the existing parapet wall. And in terms of increasing the width, again, it's a marginal increase to the point that it represents only 50% of the overall width of the terrace property itself. That in itself is not considered harmful, and we'd be very hard to defend a decision, refuse it on those grounds, and for the inspector to consider that decision.
The scheme that was refused and dismissed on appeal added an entirely new floor onto the extension, the rear extension. Is that right?
Correct. I actually have a copy of that plan with me, so I can circulate that for your records.
If we can perhaps pass that round, because obviously, I mean, I can definitely understand that trying to put another floor on that extension would create a mass and bulk at the rear, which would be unacceptable, and clearly that wouldn't be allowed at all.
And just a quick follow-up, if I may.
Yes, of course,
Chairman.
of course.
I note proposed condition number 5, sash windows and doors and painted timber frame and painted timber. I mean, just as a general point, the way I'm leaning is that I would have no issue with the application if we put a condition on saying that second story terrace couldn't be terrace, and we allowed the rest of it. As part of that condition, presumably, given that we're putting a condition on windows and doors, would it be possible for us to put a condition on saying that door on the second floor needs to be turned back into a window?
As I said, that's not part of this application related to that particular level. So this proposal only seeks to install railings around the terrace.
I think in short the answer is no.
No.
we would not be able to do that.
So,
I see exactly where you're coming from, but we can't do that. I suspect.
so condition 5 doesn't apply to painting that door in timber?
No, but it refers to the other openings which you can see. So you've got a new window here, then obviously you've got other windows that obviously has to be, because it's in the conservation area, that's a standard condition to ensure that obviously it's in keeping with the general style, the materiality and the closing and opening mechanism of those style of windows in the terrace.
Are we still allowed to speak? Because the whole of the back of the building has been demolished.
No, I'm sorry, you can't.
But presumably that window that you just pointed at, that one, the second floor window on the left-hand side.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
That you indicated that policy applies to, right?
That condition applies.
That condition applies
yes.
to, yeah. That's equally as much not part of this application as that door.
It's
right. You know, we're talking about just the railings. What I'm just to help clarify for me, what I'm not understanding is why can we condition what that window should be like,
right,
but we can't condition that opening on the right-hand side should be a window instead of a door. Why is that different?
I guess it comes down to the actual description itself, as explained. The current description is for the minor alterations to the existing outrigger to create the new patio that was presented, including the installation of the railings. Technically, I understand your point because there's no reference to associated works would normally cover other sort of alterations to the particular proposal as well. In view of that condition, I guess it doesn't specifically relate to what's actually been proposed. So there could be a case for that particular condition to be removed.
Aaron, can I just jump in? I think essentially we have existing proposed plans showing the rear elevation, and that window changes from the existing plans and proposed plans. So although the description of development doesn't say an alteration to rear window, it's clear on the proposed rear elevation that window is part of the proposals.
Okay.
There's no change to the door, so it's not encompassed with the permission should it be granted. That's why we couldn't use a condition to cover that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Can I just ask something? It's quite a lot to absorb, and I listen very attentively to residents because obviously they've been there 25 years and this affects you. We're just sitting here, we go home, but you leave and you will have this development on your doorstep. I am quite confused here and I hope you can help me out. This is conservation area, right?
Correct.
It's an English heritage, right? So someone puts a door instead of a window, and there is no enforcement. He's already tampering with conservation rights. And now you try to put some kind of railings to change the use from maintenance, which wasn't even there because there was no door to maintain the roof. And you try to make terrace. And obviously you have objections from synagogue, you have objections from residents. There will be overlooking and will be lack of privacy. So obviously it cannot be really a provable application. But at the same time, I'm really puzzled by these doors. Because if you change in conservation area a little bit, you should be literally penalized, right? Somebody comes after you. Because if this is not challenged, everybody will do the same. And if something is not challenged within 3 years, So I think it would be worth it to find out the date when the window became a door. And if it's not 3 years,
If I may, I think it's really key here that it's permitted development to put in that.
that is conservation area, whatever you touch in conservation, I should take a apply for application.
It doesn't make a difference when it comes to the general permitted development order, which says that some things that are development are actually permitted without the need to come into the planning commission, and that covers not everything. Some things are restricted to conservation areas, but not in this instance.
Well, one of the objectors here, number 6, says very clear, obviously somebody that have very good research and it's helping someone like me sitting and doing from many applications. The proposal is harming to the character and appearance of the conservation area and contrary to Royal Borough Kensington Chelsea Local Plan 2019. CL1, CL2, CL3, CL6, CL9, 611. It's our own Kensington and Chelsea law. And if we are breaching that, there will be anarchy, and anybody who wants to have a terrace like that, we just go hammer some windows, and here we are.
All I can say in response to that is that the policies that the objective reference are indeed the relevant policies that talk about the need to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area to ensure that development is of high quality. They're the standard policies that would apply to any development in the conservation area. It's then for the decision maker, whether that's us as delegated officers or yourselves tonight, to come to a conclusion as to whether we think the development does meet those policies. But that's for you tonight as the decision maker to make that
Chair,
judgment.
don't we have some kind of letter recommendation from a heritage if we're dealing with conservation area?
Well,
I'm a bit fuzzy here.
there are conservation area, conservation-related policies, but as Katie Harrell has said, some things are permitted development, so they're out with the planning system from our perspective examining proposals. They can simply go ahead and do
And
that.
I wonder if it's helpful for me to clarify that we have a large number of conservation areas in the borough, and we don't consult Historic England in the majority of applications within a conservation area. It's not standard practice on proposals to certain listed buildings, so grade 2 star, grade 1 listed buildings we would, but for the majority of applications, Historic England or English Heritage and listed people would not be consulted.
I think that's right.
Quick questions.
Will, yes, please.
Thank you. Just in relation to section 7 consultations carried out and response to number 4, you say the space can already be used as an area of amenity, but if this is a maintenance door with no railings on a 3rd floor, I mean, surely no one, unless they have a death wish, is going to be partying out on there. You know, if they fall, they could kill themselves. So just struggling to understand why you say it's currently used in that way. Could you enlighten them? Of course, we've heard from the objectors that in all their time living next door, it's never been used as a terrace, which, again, unless there were sort of drunk students with a death wish, I would imagine it would never be used as a terrace. It's on the 3rd floor with no railings.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's entirely the responsibility of the existing occupiers as to how they wish to use that space. Knowing full well they can access this space because obviously there's a door that openings on that flat roof section. I guess it doesn't happen. It happens inadvertently other places other than this particular site where people do create openings. Then they want that external amenity space, but at the same time, I guess they need to go through the proper channels and procedures in order to regularize that. This in front of us is the existing flat roof. You do have some power pit sort of ups down on either side, so although it doesn't give you full safety,
Well, you can trip over them.
you can trip over and fall over, but it does allow any potential user to use that space informally, but not as a formal terrace as such.
Thank you.
I've got a final question. I think from the discussion, I think it's fairly clear we are somewhat underwhelmed by the prospect of the railings to explicitly create the roof terrace. If we were to decide that the other aspects of the application were on balance acceptable, that is something that we would be able to do. So in other words, we could by condition say that the railings were not approved, and the implication is that we were not giving permission for the creation of the terrace. That is something that we could decide to do. Is that correct?
I have considered this, that obviously I fully understand your concerns and also local residents' concerns in terms of that use of the flat roof section as a formal terrace as opposed to informal through the installation of the railings. The issue there in terms of your approach by proposing such a condition is the description of development actually refers to the installation of a railing. So you can't have a condition to negate what's being proposed as part of the description. The only way for you to consider this as a whole would be obviously if you have concerns specifically to that application fails as a whole, the applicant would then have to come back to the council with a proposal to remove the railings and submit everything else should they wish. So it would be the same description minus the latter part of the current description.
Just following on from that, and I understand where you're coming from, isn't there enough happening in the application? In other words, it's a big enough proposal that taking out the railings from the development isn't, I agree it's stated in the description, but taking that out is, it's sufficiently minor that we could be entitled to do it. Officer?
I'll pass on to
Oh,
yeah,
not
I mean,
Laura.
it's a
No,
difficult
but,
one. It's a difficult one, and if it was just showing in plans and wasn't specifically referred to in the description, we wouldn't have an issue at all. But the problem is because it actually does form part of the description, the proposal, to actually remove a part of it, I think is probably going further than we can do using a condition.
Unfortunately, as much as I completely understand why members might think that's a sensible way forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
could you condition it that it can't be, you find you can't get rid of the railing, can you condition it that it can't be used as a terrace? Like you did on
You can't do that either because the description is not for use as a terrace, it's just to install railings. So you could, you could refuse the, if you're not happy with the railings, you can refuse the railings. But you can't actually say people can never go onto that roof space. I mean, they wouldn't. You've heard they don't do it anyway without the railings.
But that was the scale of the application.
So
But you have to look at what's before.
I think what Councillor is suggesting is that we would grant approval with the railings, so in theory they could install the railings, but then there would be a condition to preclude the use of that bit of roof.
Yeah.
The issue with that comes down to the enforceability of that condition. The reality is it's very difficult for us to sort of monitor that. Okay, we've got residents here who would be able to inform us, but I think it's almost it would be facilitating a development and then saying, but you can't actually do it by way of condition. I think it goes beyond what we should be using a condition for.
All right.
But we've done it on other developments.
Not necessarily where an actual railing has been introduced. Where we see a new extension quite regularly, we might say you can't use the roof as a terrace, but not where the development that's being applied for is sort of explicitly in order to use that space.
I think
Can I just add something?
No, sorry. So just I think the difficulty is that, in a way, the applicant has created an issue for themselves. If in the description of the development the railings were not given such a prominent description, then we probably could have taken the approach that I suggested. But unfortunately, given that it's there, we can't. Is that what officers are saying to us? Basically. Okay.
It sounds like a clever way for applicants to be able to get round, Mr. Chairman, the planning committee being able to.
If anything, you can see it as to their disadvantage.
Well, I said it's to their obvious disadvantage. In fact,
Can I just have one point?
Lloyd, just quickly.
Just it's one point really that makes it difficult, and as we're on record, that the applicant or their agent are not here to answer these questions, so it does make it extra difficult for us to inform that.
But that's up to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So, okay, I fear I know where we're going on this. Can officers help by saying, given the discussion, I suppose our reasons for refusal are that.
Chairman,
Go on.
yeah, I've just to say you do need to sort of vote on the
Yeah, I
recommendation
know that.
first. Okay, you're getting there. So
I know
thought,
that.
I thought you were going straight to the refusal.
No, because I wanted to make clear, because it's quite a complicated discussion about the description of the development and flowing from that, what we as a committee are able or not able to do. So I guess, were we to get there, the reason for refusal would be on the basis that the terrace would have an impact on neighbouring amenity that was sufficiently great that we considered the proposal as a whole to be unacceptable. Would that be, that would need to be the route that we went down? Is that reasonable?
Summary of the discussion we've had.
Okay.
That's reasonable.
Well, okay, in that case, as correctly been pointed out, we need to vote on the recommendation in front of us first of all. So the recommendation is to grant with the conditions set out in the report. Can I see those in favour, please? Can I see those against? If the recommendation is not adopted, can I propose that the resolution is to refuse planning permission based exactly on the discussion I've just had with Katie Harold? Is that seconded? Councillor Lane seconds. Can I see those in favour of that resolution to refuse on that basis? Those against? And Councillor Whedon-Sands abstains. Okay, so that resolution is adopted. Thank you very much indeed. Let's now go back to the North Pack, please. And we're now going to consider 14 Euro Place. And I think Sarah Gentry. Sarah, you're going to introduce this.
Yes, I am, thank you.
Thank you.
So this application concerns a mid-terrace property on the southern side of Drury Place. The application site is outlined in red on this aerial photograph. You'll note that the property has a rear garden which backs onto Atlantic House in St Albans Road. Planning permission is sought for a basement extension. This would be excavated under the main house and under part of the front garden and part of the rear garden. It would take up less than 50% of the front and less than 50% of the rear garden in accordance with the council's basement policy. The grey areas shown on the ground floor plan are the unexcavated areas of the garden. It is proposed that the basement would contain a gym and a swimming pool. The proposal would involve the removal of a bay tree and also a young birch tree within the rear garden. These are indicated on the plan by the hatched red areas. These are young specimens and the council's horticultural officer has no objection to their removal. The remaining trees, again indicated on this plan, would not be harmed and a landscaping plan is recommended to be submitted by condition. This photograph shows the front of the property. The application originally proposed to have a light well with a grille to the front of the property, but that has been removed. Amended plans have been submitted and that is no longer proposed. So the only external changes involve the installation of 2 roof lights within the rear garden shown on this plan here. And this is a photograph of the rear garden, so they would be located on that patio area which you can see there. That would be flush, proposed to be flush with the paving. Finally, this is a section through the proposed basement showing the depth of the basement and the swimming pool. There is proposed to be a service void which would run next to the pool and that would be 0.3 metres lower than the pool. just indicate that with my cursor. And the depth of the swimming pool here at the deepest part would be 4.4 metres in deep. The basement policy allows for single-storey extensions, and it does allow a small extra allowance for proposals with a swimming pool. And the proposal does include 1 metre soil depth, as indicated here, and it would also, it's not shown on this drawing, but there is also a proposal for sustainable drainage within that soil depth here, but it would still allow the 1 metre to be retained. The application has been submitted with the necessary supporting documents and complies with the Council's basement policy and is recommended for approval with conditions. I just finally draw your attention to the minor amendments which are to those conditions which are on the addendum report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Lady who's a neighbour has registered. Please do come and join us. And thank you for bearing with us while we discuss these other applications. So please, when you're ready, you go ahead in about 3 minutes.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. There's been a series of applications on this site in recent months, and I think you will agree that they will enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. This latest application, however, is causing the greatest concern, and we do not understand why the council have even validated it, let alone recommended it for approval. We have a number of concerns about the handling and presentation of this case, such as the applicant being allowed to change his scheme, but we were never informed of the change and consulted on it, which is very disappointing. Also, the committee report refers to this basement as being 1 story, when the plans clearly show at least 4.4 meters. It's not even, I don't think it's the deepest pool of the deepest point of the pool, and the service void is even lower. This is a substantial excavation and demonstrates my concern that it is a gross overdevelopment of the property that will result in loss of a mature tree. The bay tree is very mature and is very good for the privacy of especially the Atlantic house. It appears that the applicant has removed the front light wells that were contrary to local plan policies. However, the revised drawings still show a void created under the driveway and plant installed. If there is no external manifestation of this plant, where and how do they vent? There is no way that the swimming pool and all the plant associated with it can be installed in a newly formed basement without it having any external manifestation. These works require planning, and the plant is part of that. The council officer claims this plant does not need acoustic report because it is internal. I think this is erroneous, because the development before you today proposes to excavate land to install plant within it. And as such, that plant is part of the development. You cannot consider the plant to be internal in a space that doesn't exist yet. You can grant a swimming pool and ignore the plant. As such, the plant should be assessed correctly through acoustic and vibration reports. The basement proposed is also full width and will require underpinning. This underpinning constitutes development under S55 of the Town and Country Planning Act. Underpinning someone else's property requires them to serve notice under Certificate B of the application form. There's a clear difference between doing work to a party wall, which may have an inadvertent impact on someone else's property, and underpinning the property. The case officer explanation is factually incorrect, and my insurance company already warned me that my house, if it were underpinned, wouldn't be able to get covered with another insurance. The proposed development, roof terrace extending to the back and also the balcony, should have not been viewed in isolation, and the application were applied for separately as a clear strategy to disguise the full impact of the development. So we do have serious concerns over the handling of these cases, including allowing significant amendments to the scheme with no public consultation or explanation, suggesting that a party wall agreement should be suitable to cover someone underpinning my property when it is not. Also, they didn't send the last scheme to the committee despite having enough objections, claiming they were out of time, when in actual fact they were all received well in advance of the due date.
I'm going to have to stop you there.
Yeah, okay, so I'm saying this is my last sentence, without, notwithstanding the handling of the scheme, the applicant has not provided acoustic report, and they have not served correct notice on the certificate B. So I'm asking to refuse the application.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? Well,
First of all, thank you very much for coming here to speak. So you live at number 13,
Yes.
and I'm correct in saying that's the other sort of post-war, slightly more modern building?
I'm attached to it.
Yeah, attached to it. My question is it not fair to say, you can agree or disagree with me, but most houses on your place are sort of earlier than Victorian, and they do have basements, which would have previously been used for servants, and because your house and number 14 is a bit more modern, it doesn't have that basement. Is it exactly these two houses?
Yes.
Is it not fair to say that actually putting a basement in just makes it more similar to the rest of the houses on the road, and if not, why not?
Well, they don't really have basements, they have lower grounds. So there's only one, the bottom ones that were done like a few years ago was basement, but the rest, the whole street has lower grounds. They don't have basements down to 5 meters.
It's quite different. The low ground floors, they're sort of smaller and more
Lower
modest.
ground floor, they still have a window looking at the street. It's not underground.
And just one further quick question. You mentioned the tree in the rear garden and how that protects the view from Atlantic House. Does that protect the view for you as well, or many neighbouring people? It does look like quite a large tree. Looking at it there, it's.
It is a big tree, and especially now that this little round balcony you're seeing here is going to be extended all the way in another application. In the previous application, they got the roof terrace and the balcony extended. So this bay tree is a kind of privacy.
And with the prospect of Atlantic House being home to Thomas's and students in the school, those sort of trees are very useful, I imagine.
Exactly. Because especially Atlantic House is going to build this glass. It's just opposite, and it's going to help protect.
Thank you.
Can you just tell me what happens when it rains? Because it says here it's on in flood zone 1, and obviously it's a critical drainage system. Just what happens? Did you have any cases of flooding in your basement, or any neighbors complain about flooding within, let's say, 2 years?
Well, I can't say for my neighbors, but I don't have a basement, and I think that in general I have one neighbor on the other side of number 14, and she said her insurance doesn't cover her for flooding because we're in a flooding area. But I haven't heard anything personally.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So questions to officers. I'd like to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is just in relation to policy CL7. So we've just heard from the resident now that the large tree really does assist in terms of the view from Atlantic House, which is of course going to become a very busy school. Just keen to understand why you don't believe it's going to cause a threat to the amenity value, or perhaps how, from your perspective, you're squaring the removal of that tree with policy CL7.
Yeah, so policy CL7 refers specifically to trees of amenity value, which we have considered these trees, and as I say, our tree officer they've submitted a tree report, which our tree officer has looked at, and these two trees are, in terms of their value, the birch tree is relatively young, and the bay tree, due to its location close to the building, is considered to be a tree that could be removed. I think it wasn't very clear from the photographs, but there are also a number of other trees that you can see on this plan which are being retained. So there's those couple of crab apple trees. I think that's within the tree report, that's stated to be 9 metres high. So there are other trees which would also, as I understand, provide
And
some
just to
screening.
further very quickly, are you saying that amenity value relates solely to, say, the age and type of the tree. It doesn't relate to the tree's effect in blocking view or sheltering view, or can amenity value include, say, if there is a busy school with a window and the tree blocks that window, is that something that can fall under amenity value or not?
I think the use of the word amenity is a relatively wide-reaching term. We would normally use that, would refer to amenity as in providing a visual amenity, but I think the argument could be made that there are.
Thank you.
Roberto and then
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a query, because in the report it mentioned, sorry, back on about trees, but it mentions the removal of a bay tree is the only thing that it refers to, and yet in the presentation it's down as 3 trees being removed.
There are 2 trees to the rear, the bay tree and the birch tree. The birch tree is a young tree, but that is clearly set out within the tree report that's been submitted, and this plan is from. To the front, there are some shrubs which is proposed to be removed. In terms of,
so it's not really a tree.
It's not a tree. No, that's right.
And so just in terms of what you referred in terms of the arboricultural methods statement and the sort of the impact assessment, that included the birch tree that you're mentioning, even though there's just reference to 1 tree in the report.
Yes, it does include birch tree.
Are there, sorry if I missed them, are there any conditions to replace?
There is a condition which is a landscaping condition which asks for details of landscaping to be submitted for approval to the council. That doesn't specifically refer to a replacement tree, but it could be amended to include.
So we could make sure that we get at least 2 trees. Apologies, I know I raised it earlier, but given that the move is towards biodiversity net gain, it does seem to me that we could be doing more as a local authority as a whole, I think, in promoting biodiversity and greening.
So that would be an amendment to condition 10.
Yes.
And we could do that.
Yes.
That would be something. Okay. That's helpful. Sorry.
I have 2 questions. First of all, can you just shine some light on the difference between party wall agreement, which I understand is a civil agreement between 2 neighbors, and underpinching of a ground which more or less is digging into somebody's property?
Yes, I mean, from the planning point of view, the ownership is really a separate issue to planning, apart from the type of certificate that needs to be submitted with an application. So the resident made reference to ownership. The applicant has confirmed within the application that the works only relate to land to which they are the sole owner, and they've signed what is certificate A, which states that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but if the neighbor already researched through the solicitor and says my house will not be insured because I am first of all on a Kensington critical drainage area, and now I will be under pinch, and obviously while removing tree, I will know from flooding risk management group that trees actually help to keep water and keep away property from flooding. So it's to try to remove a tree from this property. I cannot see any, possibly, I cannot see in the papers. If it's torrential rain and property is flooded, don't they have any system in store? Because there is a huge swimming pool. I don't know how big it is. 2 meters, 3 meters, 5 meters. There is a gym as well. Where is flip installed there? I really cannot understand how this. We had another similar application maybe a month ago, again about basement, and everything was really taken care of with such details. and I'm a little bit fuzzy here. So the question is about what happens in torrential rain, how this property cannot contribute towards flooding even further. Remove the tree. This property, I cannot see drainage within. There is a flip installed for insurance from the flood for insurance. I don't know if it's compulsory to include with development if this property is insured itself, because if neighbor cannot get insurance, we are adding more misery to the neighbor and to themselves.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can explain why I'm driving at.
Insurance issues aren't.
I just see another
matters,
application.
So we can't really go into. We can talk about whether the right certificate has been served, and we can talk about the Party Wall Act isn't a planning matter either. So we just have to focus on what are planning issues. So whether someone can get insurance for their property or not, it's not a planning matter.
But if
The
it's
Party Wall
underpinning-
Act is a separate issue completely. So I think what we're down to is the ownership issue and whether they are building under their own property or not. And we've been assured that they are, and the correct certificate has been served. So
I can also respond on the flooding and drainage question. The council does have policies to address flooding and drainage.
And it's Alex Baxter, basement development.
Yes, and there is a condition recommended on this proposed permission, which would require them to carry out the works in accordance with the details that they've submitted. So they've given us a report which explains how they will address flooding and drainage. And within that report, they're proposing some measures.
Here?
It's not, the actual report was submitted as part of the application.
Shouldn't be part of complete application because I am approving something without seeing something else. Doesn't
It's
really make me
explained,
comfortable.
if you look at within the officer's report, it explains what measures are proposed. So there's a section within it, section 6.17 to 6.18, and it proposes attenuation tank, which is a way of reducing the runoff over the site, which means that is a way of addressing and reducing the flood risk.
Still, I am not convinced about the tree because we all know tree stores carbon dioxide for bark and helps to reduce the flooding. If you do the condition tree from mature tree, for example in Sydney Place where tree was literally planted there, I don't know if this can be implemented, mature tree for mature tree, because it takes time to grow.
Yes, it does take time to grow. I mean, it's possible to specify for us to have require a relatively mature tree. But I think the more important point is that this has been addressed by the measures that they're proposing. So by this tank, which will in effect hold the water and in a similar way to a tree and stop it running.
The tree is part of the ecosystem, right? So if we cut the tree, we are contributing towards the global warming, so we're not helping really here. So I would rather defend the tree but have some tank and deal with the aftermath, which is flooding, and it's a literally critical drainage area. And obviously, lady has no insurance. Sorry, I come from planning management working group. We had so many residents literally suffering from that, and hear that another lady cannot get insurance, and now she will have underpinning. It's really difficult.
I think it's been explained. Issues about insurance are not planning matters, I'm afraid.
The tree is.
I think the tree, well, as part of the proposed development, the tree officers have examined the proposal. They have found it, they said that on balance it's acceptable. Condition 10 is that there is a tree and landscaping details required. I think Councillor Wheaton-Sands has suggested that we might be minded to add to that. I think, Councillor, what did you have in mind? That perhaps there should be in appropriate places replacement of the trees. I think the bay tree sounds as though it's the most substantial tree, doesn't it?
Yeah, but a birch tree, we're killing a birch before it can grow, so.
Well, okay.
And under biodiversity net gain, obviously, we should be looking for more. but I appreciate
But it has
small
to be,
steps,
yeah.
small steps.
Mr. Chairman, if it's worth just
Yeah.
highlighting condition 11 as well, which
Yes.
also says that the sustainable drainage measures that have been supplied would also have to be implemented. So in terms of drainage, if we were to secure appropriate re-landscaping and trees via condition 10, that combined with condition 11, I think we'd be very satisfied that the flooding conditions would be the same, if not enhanced, compared to the existing situation.
Very quickly.
Yes, very quick.
Very quickly. Firstly, can you tell me what percentage of the garden remains? So we're saying under.
50%.
It's under 50%.
So you're going to minimum.
Through the chairman.
I think it's, let me just.
50 house and 50.
Through the chairman.
I think it's 51%, but I don't want to give you, I'm just going to double check with.
It does. I mean, it does look like it could be a.
The policy is.
Yeah.
Yes.
But just to.
Just to check that it is
Yeah.
indeed compliant with CR7.
51%.
Okay, need to make a decision. Policy CR7 related to basements. It's a modern, well, fairly modern policy. It's extremely detailed. It sets out a long list of matters which have to be complied with. And I think we're completely confident that that great big list of measures that it complies with this. Yes.
We are satisfied. Yes.
I think on that basis, if we amend condition 10 to say that we would want additional details as part of the landscaping condition, trees and landscaping, to make that more explicit as to what was going to be replaced in view of the fact that some trees were being removed. I think on that basis, I think rereading the scheme would need to be considered acceptable. So if I can please ask, on that basis, can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? Those against? Okay, so that recommendation was not adopted. Would you like to suggest on what basis?
What my thinking was that it's not really good enough to just say that under condition 10 they have to come back and do further landscaping. That tree is a young birch, and to remove it now will have negative effects on the amenity. Local residents under CR7 will have a negative effect in terms of flood risk. I know we talk about a tank, but a tank, its volume stays the same. As that tree grows, its roots are going to absorb far more water. 20, 30 years, it will have a much greater impact on reducing flood risk. In terms of biodiversity and the council's commitment to increasing that, the removal of 2 growing trees, I think, contradicts with that policy. It would be different if the applicant had perhaps committed to replacing trees like for like, or had committed to actually planting more trees. But
excuse me.
I'm sorry, you can't intervene, I'm afraid, at this point.
But considering that the applicant has not done that, I'm just not satisfied that under CR7, specifically the policy that relates to trees under CR7.
CR7 is a basement policy, as I understand it, isn't it?
Yes, but I think there are provisions in there relating to trees.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, that's
and landscaping.
And landscaping. Lots of trees with amenity value.
Yes. Right.
That was my point of view, but perhaps
we do also say that the tank, attenuation tanks, are actually not preferable. So even though we're putting them in, if the committee were to disagree that in this case it's not proportionate, given that they're not preferable, was there grounds on the flooding concerns due to flooding?
Tommy, maybe officers can assist. How might we be able to formulate that in a reason for refusal, taking these points together?
I think the tree issue is clear that members see it as a conflict with parts of policy CL7 that talks about trees with immunity value. There's not been an awful lot of discussion about flooding, other than from the removal of the trees. So we have had a flood risk assessment provided with the application that has been assessed, and officers are satisfied that the measures proposed would adequately deal with flooding. If members disagree with that, then I would suggest a separate reason for refusal that relates solely to flooding, rather than trying to join them.
Okay, all right.
Just perhaps if I may, Mr. Chairman, just a further point on the immunity value provided by trees. I know that this can be taken into account. Of course, we have Atlantic House, which is becoming a busy school with a playground. In terms of noise, in terms of visibility, every single tree is going to have a massive impact. So I'd say it's quite different to a case where there might be just another row of terrace houses behind this application. In that case, you might say, well, the immunity value isn't enough. But I don't know that's something we can consider, the type of building behind.
Sure, Atlantic House isn't really referenced in this development, is it? So I think that might be a bit tricky.
I think our concerns can be minuted, certainly, but I wouldn't include that within the reason for refusal. I think there's quite a clear agreement within CL7.
Okay. So what the committee might be minded to do is we'd be sort of taking CL7 and stretching it out to make the tree aspect sufficiently important that it could justify the refusal of the application. That's in effect what we would be saying.
Yeah, and that's within your sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I would suggest that probably is what we have to do. So would you like to propose that?
Yes, I propose.
Okay. And is that seconded?
I'm terribly sorry. Are we not able to condition the landscaping to allow?
No, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You can't sort of interrupt from the public area.
Sorry.
Mr. Flanagan.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just go back to the flooding? So is the reason for refusal about the tree aspect of policy CL7, or is there going to be a separate reason for refusal as well to do with flooding?
My perception is the tree reason is the key one, but I'm happy to hear from I'm happy to also include flooding as well.
Is that something that can be? Are you happy that can be defended on repeal? Katie?
I mean, it's covered by our planning policy, so yes, although I'd say, as I say, we have evidence to demonstrate that flooding would be acceptable, but of course, if you disagree, then you are able to, but perhaps you could phrase it as failure to demonstrate an increase of flooding rather than outright saying that the development would increase flooding.
Given that it's in the critical drainage area. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So.
Could you not condition a new proposal for flooding?
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Please return. Okay. So the resolution to refuse has two parts. First, relating to CL7 in relation to trees, and then in relation to flooding. Are you're content with that? I'm content that that's seconded. You're happy to second. Okay. All right. In that case, can I see those in favour of that that resolution to refuse on that basis, please? Those against? Okay. So that reason for refusal is agreed. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. If we now turn to the application in the courtyard in Smith Street, please. Let's just take a couple of minutes break. Yeah, just a couple. No, that's right.
Spending money on a basement, you should be aware of it.
We have our deadline for reading.
Yeah, we try and do that. Things like tidied up a bit on this sort of things.
If you can afford a basement, that you can afford someone to manage all of those things.
Was that the same for the previous one?
No, no one registered.
You can spend the money on the architect.
That's why.
And an agent. Yeah.
No, right.
Sorry, don't just give me a minute.
Yeah, sorry, boy.
Thanks,
Stop.
See you later.
Do you want one?
No, I lemon drop here.
I know, that's really, really nice.
Yeah, so how could you have a couple of bricks? How could you-
So that's fine.
Well,
I was interested. Oh, you got it ready?
No, the idea. Says when you see the fact of the branch, it's just been replaced, which is what condition ten.
Why they looking to which was one?
That would have been perfect. It's not. Because I'm seeing that occurs. But I think that this is, this, yeah, but it's.
Are they just
And the band they will take place nearby. Is it something to?
We've already sort of been.
It's not.
Can't let's do that on the TV. The events.
I felt sorry for once. So again, sort of struggling really.
Oh, so
Scratching around.
yeah, it's just a few times like this. Although we might say yeah,
She's up concerns.
yeah.
Because they
The money made changes on this issue.
They got them.
Yeah,
Not necessarily an agent, it really doesn't. No.
Well, there is absolutely.
They don't know,
I mean, actually,
obviously, Chiswick is
I think it's because of the integration of the
it's like the old.
yeah.
Like, client isn't that concludes the case. I'm not public like
Who's to London Fashion Week and you're wearing London Pocket Square?
I didn't want to, I couldn't say he was wearing a shirt.
He was.
He was wearing a shirt. That's the first time he ever wore a shirt.
Yeah, so first time I saw it.
Yeah, I said it. Then I said, I can't show you as much as you can show.
Thinking makes you very defective. The lady being this water straight from the fridge, so.
It's just right there. Good. Thank you very much. So we can resume. So Aaron, it's back to you for 2, the courtyard.
Yes, so moving to agenda item number SO12. Again, there is an addendum circulated for this particular item tonight regarding deletion with of the existing condition 3, which relates to trees, and replace that with details of the trees, which we can discuss later on. So this application addresses to the courtyard located on Smith Street. The proposal itself seeks the demolition of rebuilding of courtyard frontage, roofs to accommodate new window openings, the removal of roof in rear corner for enclosed first floor rear terrace, installation and replacement of roof lights, excavation of the courtyard area in front of number 2 to be level with the internal floor area. Turning to the location, you can clearly see the site is a backland site that is sandwiched between 2 residential streets. You have Wellington Square to the north, and you've got Smith Street to the south. The site in question is marked out in red. The area in blue is also in the ownership of the applicant as well. And to enter the sites, you enter by an undercroft between 2 properties on Smith Street. Moving on to a couple of aerial images of the site. What you can clearly see here, the one on the left, on the bottom you get Smith Street, then obviously you enter the site into this courtyard. You have 3 connecting buildings. The application relates to the buildings to the far side as well as to the right hand side. And on the right hand image, that's just a reverse view of the aerial shot. Turning to the actual site photos itself, the image in the top left hand photo shows you the view of the inside of the courtyard, looking back at itself towards the entrance of the entrance on Smith Street. The bottom left, now you're in the opposite direction, looking back into the courtyard, looking at the 2-storey buildings with the courtyard that surrounds it in the central location. And on the right hand side, you can also appreciate the courtyard as well as the existing building. It's worth noting, obviously, the buildings themselves are not in a great state. The application is seeking demolition, but it's not retrospective, although it's noted that the buildings have been demolished since the application has been made. Moving on to the existing demolition as well as the proposed plans. This concerns the ground floor. The left-hand image shows you the existing state of the footprint of the building. The middle image indicates the extent of the demolitions, which you can clearly see, which will be the internal walls as well as the facades facing onto the courtyard. It's worth noting on the right-hand image, you can clearly see the proposed rebuilding of the facade, more or less identical to the footprint and the extent of the facades facing onto the courtyard. And again, a similar situation on the first floor in terms of the footprint as well as the amount of demolition. One key consideration here is there is a small terrace that will be created on the right-hand image, and then that's in the bottom right-hand corner. Given the fact that the existing retaining walls will be maintained, it shall not incur any loss of living conditions to the surrounding properties as a result of this terrace. Just moving to the roof levels now, again clearly see the terrace to be created on the bottom right-hand corner, and turning to the elevations as well as the sections. You can see the roof profile would be more or less maintained in terms of the mono pitch. The only notable difference there would be the existing small roof lantern situated to the bottom of the roof slope would be replaced with more of a traditional conservation style flush roof light. But internally you can see the floor changes are identical, as well as the levelling of this part of the proposal to make sure that it's more in line with the ground level of the existing building. This particular image shows you the inner courtyard elevation, to which obviously this wall would be demolished, replaced by equally high wall. The only difference is you can see the window fenestration difference are window fenestration and detail as well as the style will be different. You can see there this grid-like structure. That's not a window, by the way. This is actually a section through that particular building. So this is an internal wall, but these are windows that look out onto the courtyard itself. Turning on to the other section now, where you have this is the entrance to the courtyard and the site itself. It's worth noting that there is a high existing screening that separates the site from these properties, the Smith Street properties, to the rear. Again, you've got a small opening at first floor level. Again, you have further opening at ground floor level with some minor changes to the roof. And this is the view looking the other way in terms of those new openings, appreciating that obviously there is no opening at the moment within that frontage, but obviously what's being proposed there are openings. And again, this is a section through that particular part of the building. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No speakers for this case. It's quite a complicated site, and I think a lot of it has actually been demolished. In fact, fairly recently. Can I focus on just one aspect of this, please? It seems as though the Wellington Square, which is mainly to the north, or mainly to the east, the building doesn't really have any windows that face onto it. It's simply high walls. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So from a point of view of amenity, that aspect is not a lot is really changing, and the central part of the courtyard building, which will be entirely rebuilt, the height of that's remaining the same.
Yeah, so
yes, is that right?
So to answer both questions, what you can see here, this is the first floor plans, and if you can imagine, the Wellington Gardens properties are situated to the right of the image.
Yes.
And you can clearly see there's a flank wall. That is to be retained because obviously it's the inner walls, the facades that face the courtyard, which will be taken out. So the existing retaining walls will be not touched and will be preserved, and no new window openings are proposed to that flank wall to ensure that obviously the living conditions of Wellington Gardens will be maintained.
Wellington Square. So on the
So
right.
Wellington,
Yeah, that's right. On the right-hand side.
Correct.
Yes. So there are no new windows proposed.
No.
Obviously, to the left of looking at these diagrams, to the left is the rear of Smith Street.
Correct.
Now, if we look as it's laid out here, the bottom part of the building, now that's being completely reconstructed. Yes.
Correct.
But the part, and again, as we look at the lower section, the part to the right is being reconstructed with essentially the same roof level. Is that correct? Have I understood that right?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your second part of your question
Yeah,
previously.
Yeah.
I can confirm that if I go to the this one. So this is a good image to compare the two elevations of the existing and proposed. What you can clearly see is Wellington Square properties towards the rear.
Yes.
You can appreciate the difference in height as well as the height overall of the existing built form. Again, what you can clearly see is it adopts a very similar height, if not the identical height. So to answer that particular part of the question, it will remain as existing.
Yes.
Now we talk about Smith Street.
Yes. Well, if you just go back to the image you just had up before.
This one.
Yeah, that
Yes.
one. Okay. So as we look at that, the lower image is the proposed. Yes. Now I'm interested. The building on the right, which is a sort of L-shaped form when you look at it in plan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've explained that what looks like an enormous window is actually an internal, because this is a section through the building.
That's correct.
Now, Sorry, I'll get there in the end. Trying to understand how this building works is quite complicated. So that part of the development proposed, are there windows in that right-hand section which face mainly north and which obliquely face onto the rear of Smith Street properties?
So new windows are being created to that courtyard elevation.
Right.
These windows will only face the courtyard elevation, and they will face perpendicular to the backs and the gardens of Smith Street.
Right.
Notwithstanding that, there is existing high fencing that will remain as existing. So what you have there in the background are the Smith Street properties. You have the window opening, which arguably sits slightly higher than the existing boundary treatment. But as I said, this sits perpendicular, and therefore it'd be very difficult for anyone standing in this location to look or make an attempt to look into the back of those properties, which sit further back into the background.
Okay. And so the windows, you're saying that the windows, if you imagine standing in those windows on the higher window, and I look to my left, I would be seeing a fence or a wall.
Correct.
Right. Okay. All right. Although in the original there weren't windows there.
There weren't any openings, so these are new openings,
Right.
which you are seeing.
Yeah.
But officers do not have concerns in terms of loss of amenities, in terms of overlooking, for example. Given
I'm wondering whether maybe the higher window might be obscure glazed. You see, I think if we look at that image, the existing windows are looking straight at the back of Smith Street, but then that's the existing situation. So it's being rebuilt. Actually, I think the fenestration looks better. Actually, to be honest, it looks an improvement.
these windows. I mean, it could be argued that although this window is going to be created to the adjoining block, these windows directly overlook the backs of Smith Street.
Yes.
But that's no worse than the existing windows, which currently do. So it's no worse than the current situation.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for going through all of that. Colleagues, other questions or discussion? Anyone?
I really don't know where to start. I think it's one of the most confusing layouts. I try to figure out Northwest Street, and we have objection from one street side and another, and obviously, for instance, Wallington number 34 is the same. Pointing out, it's a little bit higher roof. One says 12 centimeters, another 13. So rainwater will be going into my property. I am just curious about one thing. Why this development is going ahead without planning application according to those pictures?
Obviously, that's a risk that the applicant has chosen, knowing full well that if they don't secure planning approval, planning enforcement would step in and take it further. Part of this proposal does involve demolition, so if you're minded to grant planning approval, then obviously they will facilitate the rebuild, which is the latter part of what's being sought here. But that's the decision made by the applicant, unfortunately, and that's something we don't have control. Obviously, our planning enforcement team have been alerted, and obviously this is the application that you obviously say subject to the local residents that have made representations in terms of their objections to the application.
Yes, I'd just like to go on from that because obviously it's a concern of some residents that demolition has happened and it hasn't even been heard. So, but that doesn't affect this application, this application can go ahead. At least the applicant has just taken the risk.
No, yes, exactly. They've just thought one step ahead in terms of how to develop the site. This description of this proposal seeks demolition of the courtyard elevations, which you can clearly see from these plans. It's from the photos provided by local residents, that demolition has occurred. But the second step of this application is to rebuild it as per what previously existed. Now, if you refuse the application tonight, it'll be subject to planning enforcement, and you can't have a demolished building within a conservation area because it's harmful to its aesthetic and its significance, and therefore that would ensure that planning enforcement team would properly investigate and liaise with the applicant to show what can be done on this site, knowing full well that they've demolished a building without any planning consent in place, to which obviously this relates to. But obviously that falls to one side if you're minded to grant planning permission so they could fulfil the remainder of the development.
And one other question is, I noticed you notified 10 properties, there were 4 objectors. Are you able to, this is an old question, are you able to tell me where the public notice was posted, i.e. on which lamppost?
The display of site notice is actually carried out by not the planning department but a separate team. They do submit photographic evidence. It's held on record. They are instructed to obviously ensure that any site notice be placed for any particular development to be in and around the site. So it's be unreasonable for them to put up site notice down the road, for example.
So I accept that it's not part of our pack here,
yes,
but you can personally assure us that you've seen this photograph. And
yes, there is a photo that's been captured, and we have photographic evidence, because obviously if anyone challenges that, we have the records to demonstrate that it has been displayed.
Just add something which I picked up. I didn't read it properly here. I think that objector from 33 makes a good point. I think there is a need of this retrospective application for demolition works, because they must be monitored in what ways they carried out for health and safety, and neighbours as well has to be notified that this goes ahead. So if we any conditions are, one condition could be to monitor the demolition site, how it's carried out.
So I think again we're stepping into the territory of things that are covered by other legislation to planning permission. So we want to focus tonight just purely on the planning considerations. To demolish that building and rebuild something in that, there would need building regs approval, which is covered by separate legislation.
So we have plans for existing demolition and propose. So it's what it used to be, what they are doing right now, and what they want to achieve, correct? So this is overcaps everything together.
From a planning perspective, yes.
So there is no need for retrospective application for demolition, because this take care in the middle part.
That's
okay,
right.
I got it. Thank you, sorry about that. I just made that point, it's a very point, because you want to make sure that everything goes fine.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So I think very complicated state of affairs. I think given that the existing building does actually have quite a lot of overlooking, I think I'm struggling really to see how we really could reduce, because you can't take away things that are actually existing. I think the retrospective issue, I think is obviously it's regrettable, and I've never met anybody who liked the idea that you could put in a retrospective application, but it's a fact. That's how the planning system allows people to proceed. Are there any other points anyone would like to make or questions? Otherwise, I think
conservation area and windows, they look more Georgian than they used to be, but this is like a rear, right? So nobody will see it from a street, so it doesn't really matter. Does it?
That's true.
These are more into conservation area fitting in.
Yeah, I mean, it could be argued that the windows that did exist didn't really contribute to the conservation area, and what they're planning to do is to install more in keeping style of windows, as well as using brickwork, and therefore it could be argued it's an enhancement to the wider conservation.
I think that's probably that's a fair way of looking at it. I think.
Just as 10 centimeters, you see, one say it is literally obstructing view and my light. 1 centimeter for us, it's not a lot, isn't it? 10 centimeters, it's like here. But somebody says it's really make a difference. So
I think that's fair.
Just very
to
quickly,
know when you just take a vote.
in terms of greening, what could we do?
SATs.
University net gain, if we were to aim.
So-
what can you put out of your armory
So,
to try and get some,
so,
get
so
something
one of
green?
so one of the amendments to the condition was to replace the existing condition 3 from the pack with a new condition 3, which covers details of tree and landscaping
Addendum report.
in an addendum report,
Yes,
which was
in the addendum
circulated
report.
tonight.
That's right.
The current wording basically implies that no development shall take place until a scheme of landscaping, including existing and proposed, to be submitted, because we have noted that within the submission, they do talk about the relocation of an existing tree, and we don't know the precise details. There is a landscaping plan in your pack, if you look carefully, which gives you a flavour of what they're proposing as well as the extent of the landscaping. It's the one with the central courtyard outlining green, so, and that shows you the tree to be relocated.
Yeah.
So from a biodiversity point of view, we can obviously take into consideration the amount of soft landscaping, the trees to be planted, and that would be secured by a condition.
Okay.
We don't have a green roof condition. That's not currently listed. And there's no reason why green roof cannot be introduced in terms of the substantial flat roof area that they're proposing. They are rebuilding it. It is a flat roof. There's minimal openings such as roof lights. They are opening a small corner to create a terrace, but that's entirely in terms of your view as to.
That would sound good to me.
It's just a refilling, right? It's to refill. So about that tree, whereabout is that tree to relocate? What do you mean relocate? Once you are good, right?
But you talk about the new tree or the existing tree?
It says trees, demolition, character of trees, trees, issue of balancing. So this proposed to relocate the existing tree. So what do you mean relocate?
So if I show you the existing site photos, I believe that tree is right in the corner. I think it's this tree here, which is obviously sitting against the two adjoining properties, which you can make out to be that tree. Obviously, it's not a mature tree as such. It's not really established. But if you look at your pack and look at the proposed landscaping plan, you can see that tree has been
put in the plant or something.
Yeah, put in or proposed to be placed in the middle of the courtyard, which would be more of a point of interest, especially from the views, because at the moment it's blocking views from these windows and it's creating overshadowing and reducing the amount of daylight within those internal spaces. So it makes sense to move it more centrally.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Okay.
Just on that, I just support what Mr. Lyle suggested, Mr. Chairman, in terms of adding that roof.
All right. Is that generally? Do people go along with that? Okay. All right. So,
Chairman, sorry, is it clear where the green roof is going to go? Is it which roof?
Okay, let me go to the proposed.
I think it would be the central building, which has an entirely flat roof. I think is that correct? You better just check.
Well, they're both at angle, but that still doesn't prevent a green roof being proposed because
you could do both.
So technically yes, but there's less scope on this roof here because you've got the terrace, then you've got the roof lantern, then in between. Here you've got obviously few openings, but you've got quite
there's a larger area which could be a
It's
flat.
the central section.
Yes, the central. Yes, and that would need to be a new condition.
Correct.
Okay.
And just before the vote, I know you've touched on it already, but just because some aspect of this application is retrospective, that's not a reason to refuse. You have to look at it as though the demolition hadn't been done.
Okay. In that case, I think we can move to a vote. So the proposal is to grant permission with the amended condition 3 as sent out in the addendum report and a new condition relating to the central area having at least partially a green roof. Yeah. So in that case, can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? Recommendation of the green roof. Those against? Are you abstaining? Okay. Councillor North abstain. Okay, so that is agreed. Okay, thank you very much. If we can now turn finally to the advertising consent in Cromwell Road. Alan, that's back to you.
Yeah, so moving on to the last item tonight, item agenda reference is 009. Application sites 51 to 55 Cromwell Road and 1 to 2 Queensbury News West. This proposal before you is for the temporary scaffold shroud with insert area for commercial advertising and information measuring approximately 11 by 7 metres in area. What you can see from this particular image is the aerial view of the site. It does lie within the conservation area. Directly opposite, you've got that Natural History Museum. What you can see also is concerns 2-3 adjoining terrace properties that backs onto the road to the rear. More of a street level on the right hand side, appreciation of the existing property with its architectural features, and on the left hand side you can make out the 3 adjoining properties at 51 to 55 Cromwell Road, which also encompass a couple of properties along Queensbury News West. Again, moving on quickly to the existing front elevation, the red box basically indicating the area in question for the shroud. And this is the proposed front elevation of the shroud. Again, what you can see it sits slightly higher than in line with the chimney pots of the existing terrace, and you can clearly see the dark or the hashed area in the middle, and that's where the commercial advertisement is to be situated. In terms of the actual dimensions themselves, the overall shroud that surrounds the building is approximately 27.5 metres in width, about 20 metres in height. Then the central portion for the advert would be approximately 11 by 7 metres in area. And finally, you've got the existing proposed views. At the moment, there is existing scaffolding on the site. I should remind members that obviously this is associated with a previous consent to convert it and extend the 3 adjoining properties into some form of hostel accommodation, hence the need to erect the scaffolding at the site. And on the right hand side, a visualisation of what the shroud is going to be, it's going to appear to be with the small area for the advert. And also, I should also remind that by verbal update, I have noticed there's a slight drafting error in one of the conditions, condition number 7. At the moment, it states the illuminated advertisement hereby approved shall not be illuminated between 0000 hours, i.e. midnight, and 0600 hours the following day. The following day should be deleted and it should be any day. Otherwise, you're going to have 24 hours, another 6 hours, 36 hours. Yeah. So
no, you're quite okay. All right. Any questions about this? No.
Just in terms of out of interest, very quickly, in terms of how it works, do we get any? Does the council get any of the money made from any advertising put on the that bit?
I mean, this is
no.
This is development on a private.
The answer is no.
There's no greening either. Presumably, it's very lucrative, isn't it?
That's why the application's in.
Well, I think I suspect it is extremely lucrative. However, that there actually, I think, Katie would confirm, I think there have been a number of appeal decisions over the years where inspectors have taken the attitude because something like scaffolding is there anyway, and can be there. It's very hard for somebody in a location like this to then argue that the advertisement causes harm, because you're going to have scaffolding there anyway. So I think that argument is, people have attempted to deploy, but inspectors have never bought that argument.
And the national planning policy guidance actually suggests that shroud advertisement could be considered as an alternative to cover unsightly scaffolding and to be a suitable form of development in the interim, because obviously it's for a temporary period and this shroud adverts would be only up for 12 months, so there's not going to be any long-term effect.
Given how profitable it is, we can't put an S106 condition or something to get a little bit of a contribution.
No, I don't think we'll do that. No.
I'm afraid not. No.
I think
Yeah,
actually it's an interesting point. Could a Section 106 agreement apply to an advertising consent application? Could it?
No, section
I mean, there's
106
only two things you can possibly consider for these adverts, and that's the effect on public safety
Yeah.
and amenity.
So I'm not sure.
And the section 106 goes to the town and country planning act and not to the advertisement regulations, so there's no mechanism.
That. So, colleagues, need to make a decision here. So the recommendation is that we grant the consent. Can I see those in favour, please? Those against?
Just look at this. Condition 9.
Are you abstaining or
I just
voting
want to see
against?
very quickly condition application.
Well, that's granted. If you've got a question afterwards, please go ahead. Aaron, I'm sure, can help. So that concludes the